Be before the African family. Welcome to another edition of the African Liberation Media Show. Your co-host here, Brother Almost. And today we have a very special guest with us, Brother Ricardo Maarman of South Africa, who is running for president or trying to run for president in South Africa. And I'm going to let him talk about what's happening now with those elections. Brother Ricardo, how you doing today?
Thank you very much, Brother Amos. It's a pleasure and an honor to speak to you and to your audience. Thank you very much for having me. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well. I had to work earlier this morning. So over here on our time, it's about 1 in the afternoon. And of course, where you are, it's a little after 7 o'clock.
Yeah.
So glad that you could stay up and do this interview for us. So I want you to really introduce yourself to our listening audience. For those who may not be familiar with you, talk about what you do and talk about how you got into politics.
Yeah. So thank you very much again. I really appreciate that. So I am a politician, as you've mentioned. I've entered. I'm not a politician by profession, but I've entered into the political race. Because our country is still subjugated. I'm sure you and your audience have discussed the fact that many African countries are still under neo-colonialism, and South Africa, unfortunately, is no different. And maybe we can discuss this a little bit further on. But that's one of the reasons that motivated me to enter, because there's no political options really in the country that challenges this issue or tries to decolonize the country. Where I come from, how did I get into that path? I fought the COVID-19 lockdowns that happened a few years ago. So I was quite a strong activist against the country. There was not, many politicians that stood up for this. But I fought against the lockdown. I led the movement that was called Show Us the Virus movement. Because we question the very existence of the virus, because we have suspicions in South Africa that they use the pretext of the virus with the smallpox to wipe out quite a bit of our population. HIV, AIDS, same issue, and now with COVID. And as you can imagine, these experiences made us very suspicious. So that is where I got into it. My struggles against the lockdown showed me that our people are under serious pressure and problems, and there's no real political leadership or will to protect them.
Yeah, and that topic alone, dealing with COVID and the virus, during those times, they were shutting and banning a lot of information online. So for you to stand up and challenge that in the court specifically, I think it was a very brave action, because I'm pretty sure you faced a lot of opposition with the government of South Africa with that challenge.
100%. I mean, I thought many times that they would probably lock me up, although the whole country was at that stage in a virtual jail. So I was quite outspoken against it. I continued to be. And this is part of the reason why I'm boycotting the elections now, because there's no political option now, if I'm not on the ballot, that speaks out against the lockdown and makes it virtually inevitable for them to repeat the same again. As you mentioned, in South Africa, I fought this in the High Court in South Africa. I don't know quite people in different parts of the world might have different legal structures, but the High Court in South Africa is a very senior court. And I went with the case all the way up to the highest court in the country, which is called the Constitutional Court. And unfortunately, this cost a lot of money, cost a lot of effort, but we received very little justice, if any.
Mm, mm. So I guess a comparable to where we are here in the United States, that would be comparable to the Supreme Court, the highest court.
Yes, indeed.
Okay.
Yes. So that would be the. So I think your equivalent is the Supreme Court. Yes.
All right. Now, here in the United States, we're familiar with different political parties in South Africa. Primarily the two, or I should say now three, that we're most familiar with is the ANC, of course, and Democratic Alliance, and then also the Economic Freedom Fighters. But you're representing a different party called the Azania Party. Can you talk about what makes your party different from the ANC? Over here, when we look at the ANC and studying the ANC, going back to the time that Nelson Mandela became president, a lot of people over here disagree with some of the stances that Nelson Mandela took. And then we look at the Democratic Alliance, we look at that as a party more of a liberal, an opposition party, a party primarily supported by Western countries. But talk about what the Azania Party can bring that other parties in South Africa aren't able to bring to solve the problems of the country.
Look, there's quite a bit to say about that, but I'm sure your audience is very, very informed about issues of politics around the world, as in America, and so I will give them the difference between us and these parties. The difference between us and these parties are quite simple and similar to the case that you have in America, and that is the parties that you mentioned are dominated by a Jewish elite in the country. A moneyed Jewish elite, unfortunately. That's Julius Malema of the EFF, as well as the ANC and the DA. With the DA, the Jewish elite's control over the party is very open and plain. Many of their senior leaders are Jewish. When it comes to the ANC, there's a lot of senior leaders within the ANC ranks, that have led the ANC in certain directions. Joe Slovo, I believe, is from Lithuania, if I'm not mistaken, and many others. And that is the case there. Julius Malema also had his influences, as you know, with communism itself. So the difference between all of this is that we are directly opposing the domination of South Africa by a Jewish elite and the neo-colonialism by them. So this is the difference. Azania is the only political party that is outspoken about this issue. Julius Malema, the EFF, make the fight between black and white. And it's not so simple. There is also the ultimate power in South Africa is this dominant, moneyed Jewish elite, personified in the likes of the Oppenheimer family that has exploited and dominated our country for far too long.
It's interesting that you make that point, because that's exactly what we deal with here in the United States. We have the illusion of a two-party system with the Democratic and Republican parties. But when you look at each president as they're electing, you look at the cabinet that president puts around them. Those are primarily Jewish elite politicians. And also you have, of course, in America, you have corporations and lobbyists and organizations like AIPAC, which provide tons of funding to influence the American, not only domestic agenda, but the geopolitical agenda as well. So when we're talking about South Africa, can you give us some examples of some of the influences that these Jewish elites have on the country that we may not hear about in the news here in the United States?
The first is I want to say, if you've seen one, Jewish elite-dominated country, you've seen them all. Obviously we are very well versed with what's happening in America, and that's why I can say that with full confidence. So the same thing happens in South Africa, that when it comes to politics, it's the funding of politicians. So all of the political parties, the major ones that you are familiar with, they are all funded directly and indirectly by a Jewish elite. So that's the first part of it, it's the funding. Our politicians in South Africa, as well as in America, I'm sure they are very wealthy politicians. Our president is one of the richest people in the country, Ramaphosa. Never opened a business or anything in his life. This is literally, straightforward bribery that we see here. But of course, all legalized and all of that. So that's the first dominance. The Jewish elite, they have groomed many of these politicians. So like Ramaphosa, he's been affiliated with the Oppenheimers in one way or the other since the 1970s at least. And now he's the president of the country. In turn, the politicians have made sure that the mining rights and the mineral exploitation of South Africa is then in turn done by the Jewish elites, and much of South Africa's economy is very monopolized. The banking, almost all of the economy has just got a few, top producers or suppliers which are in the main Jewish in the country. And this is all done legally, of course, as well. And then, of course, their domination over the South African Reserve Bank, their dominance in the media, their dominance in academia, all fronts, really.
So the Jews control the media in South Africa too.
Yes, 100%, 100%. This is one of the very important, sources of their dominance, because through this they keep the people unaware. So in South Africa, what most people think, and what you will hear from EFF, for an example, from Julius Malema, that it's white people that dominate South Africa. And that's not true. White people are sort of just like middle management. The real people who dominate South Africa are Jewish elite.
Wow. So as far as the demographics, the population, are there a lot of Jewish people living in South Africa, or do they more so operate from a remote location and control the politicians and the media and different things like that? Are there actually a lot of Jews in the country owning land and living there?
There are a lot, but as you know, with this issue, it's very obscure. In our textbooks and things like that in South Africa and in public discourse, very few people venture into this topic, So officially, unofficially, there's very little knowledge available about this. But what I can say from my experience and knowledge, that they are not a majority of our population, but the numbers are far higher than what they do say, But I think around about the same time that there was big Jewish migration to the United States, which was about, I think, the 1890s, 1880s, around there. That is also when huge Jewish migration came to South Africa. I'm not sure of the figures. I think 40,000 or so at that time, mainly from Lithuania and such countries. I think some of them went to America and, set up shop in New York and places like that. But I believe the population is much bigger, because you must remember South Africa had multiple migrations to the country of Jewish power, if you want to call it. So when the Dutch came, the Dutch East India Company, when they came to Cape Town, there was, as you know, the dominant shareholders of the Dutch East India Company were Jewish at that time. And some of them came to South Africa at that stage. Earlier on, there was contact with the South African coast by the Portuguese. So as you know, there was the Jewish elite also dominated Portugal, and some of them made contact to South Africa. And later on, there was also a big Portuguese, migrants to South Africa. So to cut the long story short, my brother, it's hard to say the population numbers. But I would believe they are far beyond what they say. I think they say it's in the hundreds of thousands, but I think it's more closer to the early millions, if you want to call it, because of the way they dominate South Africa and the kind of administration you would need from them to dominate the country as they do.
So that leads me to another question. From here, we look at certain people like Sister Naledi Pandor of the ANC, and we look at how she's been instrumental in pushing the charge against Israel for the genocide that's taking place in Gaza and bringing that court case to court. Is that just an example of people on the ground going rogue against their Jewish elite funders, or are we missing something here with seeing South Africa take the lead charge in bringing this genocide case to the World Court?
I think, unfortunately, people are not exposed to the full truth. Not only yourself there having a bit of distance and not too familiar with the politics here, but even in South Africa, as I said, As you mentioned, you asked me, do they dominate the media and the information flow? Yes. And so therefore people are not fully aware. You see, like I explained to you, the African National Congress, the ANC, has been dominated by the Jewish elite for a very long time. That is part of the reason I believe that the PAC, the Pan-African Congress of Azania, that was led by Professor Sobukwe, broke away from the ANC in the 1950s on this complaint. At that stage, he said that this was liberals, and he thought it was liberal white people that dominated the ANC. But those liberal white people that he thought were liberal white people were a Jewish elite that dominated the ANC. So the ANC is fully dominated since then. Other people would argue that it goes back further. So for the ANC to make such a major political move without consulting with their masters is highly unlikely. And to give you an idea, just before that case was taken to court, the parliament in South Africa overwhelmingly voted for the Israeli embassy to be closed in South Africa and for the ambassador of Israel to be sent back home. The parliament voted on this. President Ramaphosa, that's the leader of the executive branch, Minister Naledi Pandor, she sits in his cabinet, and she serves purely at his prerogative. And he went against Parliament's decision, and he kept the embassy open, and he kept diplomatic ties, etc. Now he takes the case to the ICJ, and people in the world or everywhere thinks that Cyril Ramaphosa, I've just explained to you, Cyril Ramaphosa has been one way or the other connected with the Oppenheimer family since the early 1970s. He's used to taking their orders. He's used to obeying them. So the ICJ case is part of an intrigue. It is not a spontaneous thing. I think it's people's sympathy towards the Palestinians, etc., has been hijacked for other causes. And one of those causes, I believe, is that it's going to be an excuse and a maneuver to apply sanctions against South Africa, coming from the United States Congress. There is already such talk going on there. So in short, my brother, no, all is not as it seems with this ICJ issue.
You're absolutely correct. We just did a program a few days ago talking about a bill that's in the House right now. I think it's called HR 7256. And it has to do with reviewing relations, United States reviewing relations with South Africa. So it does look like there are going to be sanctions eventually that will be placed on South Africa by the United States.
Yes, I think so. I think this was always part of the plan. And of course, look, we can talk a bit deeper into it. But suffice it to say, one, I don't know. I don't know how much, Minister Naledi Pandor knows about this or not. She seems to be very sincere, in her advocacy, for the Palestinian people that deserve, such sincere advocacy. Many people in South Africa, the majority of our population are in support of the Palestinian cause. So it's not the fault of the people, but I think people higher up, starting with President Ramaphosa, had other ideas with the ICJ case altogether. And one of those ideas is to create a pretext for sanctions against South Africa. Because you must remember, as we speak now, there's a program in place to destroy the South African economy. South Africa's economy, as you know, is strongest in the African continent. It's got a very robust economy, strong fundamentals, infrastructure is relatively in good shape, etc. And the idea now is basically to destroy all that and to crush the South African economy. And there's been a series of things to do this. Part of the ANC's mismanagement and corruption is organized. This is organized corruption. And I believe encouraged and steered by the Jewish elite in the country. And then our state-owned enterprises are being destroyed. Now there is power, cuts or blackouts, further hampering our economy. We've been grey listed. We have been downgraded, by the ratings agencies. So, and now Congress is talking about sanctions. I'm sure you can see the picture I'm painting to you here, my brother, that there's a process to deindustrialize, de-develop, or strike down the South African economy.
Yeah, and they're doing similar things around the world in various countries, including right here in the United States. The same things, the same playbook is being ran here. And it's interesting that because historically we look at, a lot of Jewish elites, or I'll just say a lot of Jews, they often play on both sides of the fence. So on one end, they'll support an adversary, and on the other end, they will act like they are the philanthropists or people who come in to solve an issue. So they'll cause an issue on one end, and then on one end, make it be perceived as though they're trying to resolve that issue, when the part of their whole plan is to orchestrate the problem in itself so that they can get the end result that they're looking for.
You're 100% correct, and that's what's happening in South Africa, that we don't have a proper democracy. Most people, especially the poor and the oppressed people, they sense it, but they can't fully grasp what is going on. But we have these many political parties. I mean, we've got many political parties here contesting, but the major ones, almost all of them, are funded one way or the other, like I said, by the Jewish elite that dominate the country. And so it is what you call controlled opposition, or make-believe politics. It's the same. I mean, once you discover the truth in America, you realize the whole Republican Democratic issue is fake. Now, in South Africa, the same thing. The politics here is fake. My political leadership now with Azania is the only real, true political leadership in the country that I believe is capable of trying to rid our country of the Jewish elite dominating us. The other major political parties are pointing at each other. So black versus white and all of that kind of thing inside the country. So yes, it's true. Just like happening in your case there, they control all the sides in South Africa. So when you see a fight happening in the media or on TV, a major trade union versus an academic or a political party, when they show it to you on the media, this kind of fight, it's usually fake. As you will see in South Africa, I would get very little media coverage because this kind of talk is dangerous in a country like South Africa, where the vast majority of the people know that they know in their hearts for a fact the ANC has betrayed them and the ANC has sold them out. But they are vague about who the ANC sold them out to. And, that needs to be kept from them, according to the mainstream.
So I have a question about just the election process in South Africa, because here in the United States, they give you the illusion that people can vote for or directly select the president. So we have the Electoral College, which is, a group of people who come together and they give their vote based on the popular vote. In South Africa, I know in your general elections, you have the parliament. Explain the election process there. And then also I want you to talk about what they're currently doing to you now as far as the provincial versus the general election.
Yeah, so our process and the way that they manage things here, I mean, it's very similar, but maybe slight differences between here and America. So the first thing is that there needs to be a sifting of who qualifies to be on the ballot and who does not qualify to be on the ballot. So that's the first part of call that there is. And the requirements in South Africa, there's a signature requirement. So you have to collect a certain amount of signatures. And this is a very new law, by the way. Before, you just pay a deposit, an election deposit, and you're on the ballot. Now you have to pay a deposit, plus you have to have a number of signatures, etc. Plus there is a few administrative things that you have to do: fill in this form, tick that box, etc. And so the IEC, which is the Electoral Commission of South Africa, they will then go through there and they will apply whatever standard they have to say who will the South African people choose and who won't they be able to choose. So that's the first issue. And that's the issue that, that I'm having issues now with, because one of the things that the IEC has done is, firstly, I believe I've met all the requirements. In fact, they've now said, because they're not allowing me on the ballot, they're going to refund, the hundreds of thousands of rands that I've paid, which is tens of thousands of US dollars, that I've paid to be on the ballot. So that's the first process, a process of trying to see who makes it and who doesn't, and who the people can choose between and who doesn't. The next step of our election process, of course, is when people actually start campaigning. So this is where the influence again comes to the fore. This is where the Oppenheimer family and the Jewish families then pour hundreds of millions of rands, tens of millions of US dollars behind different campaigns. I believe the Democratic Alliance, they probably have close to $1 billion rand that they're campaigning with. They might even have more money this year than the ANC. So that's the second part of it, where you have them controlling things. And then with the money, how many election paraphernalia can you put up? How many volunteers can you have? How many posters can you print or billboards can you put up? This is entirely restricted to the amount of Jewish money that is floating around in the system. And then, of course, there's the media. So according to our rules in the country, the media are supposed to give fair electoral coverage to everybody that is contesting politically. But the media doesn't do that. I have not been interviewed by any of the major television stations in South Africa at all. Our political party gets zero coverage in the media, absolutely zero coverage. Now, this is not supposed to be, I complained to the Electoral Commission and say, look, it's your job to make sure the elections are fair. And how can it be fair when big parties that have billion rand budgets get free advertising from the media by constantly interviewing them, doing stories on them? I, with a limited budget that's contesting just like them, can't get that kind of free coverage. And then, of course, after that is the voting. Many people have had their complaints, have wondered, is this, taking place properly? Is the counting done well, or is the counting not done, in appropriate fashion? And then the last part of which, where I say that, the Jewish elite has dominance over our political system, is the courts, After an election is done, people go to court if they question the results or if they have any problems with that. And our courts are completely dominated by the Jewish elite in South Africa. The Oppenheimers and these kind of people, I've not heard of them losing court cases in our courts. Like the Democratic Alliance that I've told you, they are a smaller party than the ANC in terms of their electoral turnout. They are not in government. They don't elect judges. But the Democratic Alliance wins almost all its cases in our courts, even against the ANC.
Wow. Yeah, and I think a lot of people, when they think about neo-colonialism, they only think about the former countries who control or continue to control African countries, but they don't look at the people behind that control, which in many cases people will just think that they're white people. But in most cases, as you mentioned, they're the Jewish elite who are continuing to control African countries through neo-colonialism, and specifically just direct control over things such as what you mentioned, the media, the politics, etc.
No, definitely. And I think, I've maybe also explained to your audience and to yourself that I've written a book about this. As you can imagine, I've got, a bit of research and understanding. So many people might not be familiar with, thank you very much. There it is. So the subversion of South Africa is to explain really how the Jewish elite has come to dominate South Africa. Because as many of your audience might be aware, that the domination or the way that the Jewish elite dominate countries is not necessarily to conquest and war. If they do conquest and war, they usually do this through other countries. But what they do is a process of subversion, making sure they dominate the banking system, making sure they dominate the finances, etc. And by such means, they control people's livelihood and then control the people. Mm-hmm. So my book, The Subversion of South Africa, traces this domination, throughout South African history up until today. And of course, here I'm focusing on the political aspects. I'm also going into the one of their plans that they have in the country, or agendas, which is to to the genetically modified foods. And now lately, one of the things that have risen as well is the LGBTQ agenda that has been pushed on the people in South Africa. So these are all tactics of subversion. And I want to say, people wrongfully think that the South African people welcome the idea of homosexuality and LGBTQ. No, not at all. This is being imposed on us. And that is why I'm saying this is a form of colonialism. If you have a referendum in South Africa today about LGBTQ, overwhelming majority of South African people would not be in favor of that. But of course, the impression is shaped out there that we are Africa's LGBTQ, exception or head office or something like that. This is an imposition by the Jewish elite, and the ANC is allowing it because the ANC is at their service.
I'm glad that you mentioned that, because you're making a lot of things crystal clear as to because with us not being on the ground in most cases and just observing from afar, mostly all of the information that we have access to is coming through the Jewish elite media, unless we tune into, programs or, videos that may be done by people actually on the ground, such as yourself. So I'm glad that you're able to crystallize a lot of what is happening. And it's, like you said, it's similar to what's happening here. If people here wanted to donate to your cause, to help you with finances on your campaign, how can they do that?
I think one of the ways is, to buy a book. So buy the book. It will, it will help you to have a better understanding of our conditions in South Africa, so that you can, better familiarize yourself. Much of our fight is connected to yours, so you'll know that. So the first one, as I say, buy the book. The book is currently available, on the internet. You can go to Zara, XARRA books.co.za. And secondly, you can donate to us directly. You can go to our website, which is www.azania2024.org.za. And there you can just go to our donate tab and then please donate to us. We would greatly appreciate that. The fight that we are fighting in South Africa to free ourselves from the Jewish domination is not separate from the same problems that you have in America. In fact, if you buy the book and you read through it, you will see that there are similarities and connections between our South African Reserve Bank and how it was established and your Federal Reserve in America. Some of the same people are involved, etc. And so there are many, things that add up together. Of course, the vaccination programs that have been, that starts with the Rockefeller Foundations in America, has come here to South Africa. The smallpox vaccinations, that was rolled out in South Africa, the Kissinger, Henry Kissinger, that was also very close to the apartheid government, that developed biological warfare or biological weapons in South Africa to attack our people with. So I would like people to please support our cause here. You know, the two causes are intertwined, and one of the ways in which I would encourage that is to read the book, because knowledge is one of the ways in which we get out of this serious dilemma that we face.
Definitely. And what we'll do is I'll link both of those links down in the description of this video. So if you watch this video, definitely make sure you purchase a copy of the book. I will be purchasing a copy of the book because I definitely want to read the information that's inside of the book. And, you know, Brother Maarman, we appreciate you for taking the time to come on. Oh, go ahead.
My brother. I just want to say I gave you the wrong address for the book there. It is Xarra, so it's XARRA.com. That is the proper address of the book.
Okay.
In order to make the book sales. Okay,
all right. Yeah, I'll post the correct link down in the description. And again, we thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to join us and provide the information that you provided. Is there anything else as far as how people can contact you outside of your website that you want to leave for our listeners?
Yeah, you know, as I say, the main way of getting hold of us would be, you know, to go to our website at azania2024.org.za. That will be the best way to get hold of me. You know, they can leave their information there. We quite readily respond to people. And of course, I would encourage people to buy the book as much as possible in the US. I would love to come to the US and maybe interact with you and discuss with you some of these things, explain the book further. The book delves, you know, nice and deep into issues that I'm sure you are familiar with, you know, and characters you are familiar with. Nelson Mandela. It gives you quite a different perspective on him. Biko, you know, Steve Biko, Professor Sobukwe, de Klerk, many of these key issues, the apartheid period, you know, our period where the British colonized us directly. So much of this, you know, we tie in to the book quite well. We delve deep into the history, come into the present, and show you all throughout, you know, unfortunately, the subversion that our country is going through by this Jewish elite. And maybe in South Africa, you know, when you see the subversion happening in another country, and you see the way in which I have painted it. So the best way for you to get a good understanding of the subversion is to look at it on a broad scale, and to look over a period of time, and to look in various instances. Like I've explained to you, in science, in our judiciary, in our politics, in business, etc. Once you see it everywhere, the evidence starts building up and a clearer picture, you know, is painted. And so people would have a better understanding even once they interpret this of what is happening in their own countries, whether that's in the US or any other country. Like I say, much of the world today has been dominated by the Jewish elite and the Jewish people as a group. No, of course, not all of them are entirely involved in this. That's why I mentioned the Jewish elite, but quite a few, quite a significant group of people that are part of, you know, subverting people's countries. But once you have an idea of how it's happening in one country, and this is what the subversion of South Africa aims to show, it's easier using this framework to understand it in America or to understand it in any other place in the world.
Definitely. Well, Brother Maarman, again, we say thank you for joining us. To the listening audience, leave your comments down in the comment section, and definitely go out and purchase this book. If you don't do anything else, support Brother Maarman in his drive to be the president of South Africa, because we need real leaders to achieve real revolution and political change. So we definitely support you, Brother Maarman. And until next time, Abibi Hodie.
Thank you very much, my brother. I really appreciate that. And God bless to your audience.